Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I lead the Institute's reparation work, and I am the convener of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Welcome all of you to the first public session of the New Jersey Reparations Council, hosted by the History of Slavery New Jersey Committee. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful evening. As a disclaimer, I just want to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Press is in attendance to listen only. Also, closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. Just hit the button. In the first part of this session, the committee will discuss their work on the history of slavery in New Jersey. And in the second half of this session, it will be open to public comment for those who have previously registered. As I mentioned, this is the first session, the first of 9 sessions of the council. The other sessions will be hosted by the Segregation Committee in December of 2023. Also be on the lookout for the specific date for that, which will come out soon. We will also have public sessions hosted by the Democracy Committee, Economic Justice Committee, Public Safety and Justice Committee, the Environmental Justice Committee, Faith and Black Resistance, Health Equity, and the Public Education and Narrative Committee. Now, it is my honor to introduce the President and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, my colleague and our leader, Ryan Haygood.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre, for the introduction and for framing the conversation tonight. I welcome you all to the first public session of the first of its kind New Jersey Reparations Council, led tonight by the History of Slavery in New Jersey Committee. Some of you may be asking, why convene the New Jersey Reparations Council? And the answer simply is that although slavery shaped every aspect of New Jersey, too many believe that it never happened here. But as you'll hear tonight, New Jersey's original sin of slavery and its lasting sting tell a very different story. Co-chaired by Tajania Henderson and Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and comprised of local, state, and national experts, the New Jersey Reparations Council is finally confronting and working to repair the harm from New Jersey's deep and often overlooked institution of slavery and its enduring impact on the contemporary life of Black people in our state. And because these inequalities have been reinforced by generations of policy design, not individual behaviors, they must be repaired by design. The council will not only propose bold strategic policies to repair the enduring harm to Black people from slavery, but it will also answer this foundational question. And that is, what kind of reparative system does New Jersey need to build and invest in for Black people here to finally be free, to thrive, to win? Our affirmative vision for this council is for it to think boldly and imaginatively, and to propose solutions that will both compensate the descendants of enslaved Black people and their communities for lost wages, and to address the structural racism at its core through reparative policies and investments that are commensurate and proportional to the enduring harm from slavery. And on Juneteenth 2025, this council will produce a report that will draw connections between New Jersey's history and its present, and propose comprehensive policy recommendations that will, on their own, serve as a blueprint for how New Jersey can repair the enduring harm from slavery, and also act as a vast resource to the reparations task force that New Jersey will ultimately create through legislation, thanks to the ongoing advocacy of our faith allies for reparations partners. As we look ahead to the council's work, it is both thrilling and daunting, but we know that the only way forward to building a new New Jersey is through. For we are convinced that every movement for racial justice requires fierce and independent advocates to lift their voices when others won't. I am convinced that the New Jersey Reparations Council, building on a decades-long fight in this state, will help to move the issue of reparations from unsafe, unpalatable, and impossible to inevitable and conventional wisdom. And tonight's public session, hearing your voices, your experience, essential to the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council. I thank you for standing with us, and it's my pleasure now to introduce our core thought partner, Maisha Simmons, Senior Director of New Jersey Grant Making for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Good evening, Maisha.
Good evening, and thank you, Ryan. My colleagues and I at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are committed to achieving health equity in New Jersey, which means that everyone who calls our state home has a fair and just opportunity to live their healthiest life possible. Yet the current reality is that there are large and persistent and increasing gaps in opportunities for health and well-being across neighborhoods and communities, depending on who you are and where you live. As the nation's largest philanthropy dedicated to health, we deeply believe in dismantling structural racism and the barriers that millions face every day simply because of their race or their intersectionality with other groups that experience oppression. As a funder of the council, the foundation is clear in our stance that the time has come for New Jersey to create a shared understanding of the harms caused to Black New Jerseyans over the past 4 centuries and embark on a process to remedy these injustices. To do this right requires a great deal of research, planning, and public dialogue. Since 2021, RWJF has funded efforts to learn from the global experiences and impact of reparations. Learn how reparations could close racial health and wealth gaps that persistently impact Black Americans and Indigenous people, and strengthen the reparations field directly by supporting organizing efforts, capacity building, and technical assistance in building towards federal, state, and/or local policy action. Now the foundation is funding the council to serve as the leading edge of efforts to convene a non-governmental process to initiate the necessary work. We see the council's work as a critical precursor to achieving the justice that our governments owe Black New Jerseyans. Together, we have an opportunity to set a national example by addressing structural racism in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner. Our commitment to do so is rooted in our dedication to health, equity, and justice. My colleagues and I are proud to be on this journey and eager to engage in the hard work it requires. I'm excited about the crucial discussion that we'll have this evening. And with that, I turn it over to Jean-Pierre.
Thank you so much, Maisha, for your support, and as well to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for your tremendous support for this wonderful council. And now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce one of the co-chairs of this council, Dean Tajania Henderson. Tajania Henderson serves as the Dean of the Graduate School at Rutgers University, Newark, where she's also a professor at Rutgers Law School. Her scholarship focuses on the historical impact of punishment regimes on property systems in the US, and she's particularly interested in the legal histories of incarceration and chattel slavery. Everyone, please welcome Dean Tajania Henderson.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre, and hello to all of our colleagues from the public who are joining us today. As Ms. Simmons mentioned, this work is critical. It's a critical precursor to the work that we expect our legislative partners, prodded by our faith allies, to continue. It's critical to the work that is happening in the region around regional equity, and it's critical to the work nationally. And so we are incredibly excited and really motivated about your presence here tonight as we embark on this journey together. It's my pleasure to be one of the co-chairs for the Reparations Council here in New Jersey. It's an honor to serve in this way. And luckily, I am joined by this incredible committee, who I'll introduce to you in just a second. The History of Slavery Committee's role in the New Jersey Reparations Council, is to examine and study the history of slavery in New Jersey from its inception as an English colony in the 17th century to the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1866. And for folks who may be wondering why it's so important that we think about New Jersey's history in this way, it's because, as has been said before, New Jersey was called the slave state of the North for a reason. It's not just that slavery here was among the more brutal regimes that has been documented, but also because New Jersey was among those states that refused to ratify the 13th Amendment. New Jersey did not ratify the 13th Amendment until it was already ratified. In other words, New Jersey came to its 13th Amendment, its abolition of slavery, kicking and screaming. This was not a place where freedom was met with open arms. In fact, this was a place where freedom was met with serious, sustained resistance at every level of local and state government. And we want to ensure that that history of New Jersey's resistance to Black freedom does not fall away from this conversation. And so we'll have a chance to talk about that today. And also that will be part of the report. In addition to examining that kernel of resistance that marked slavery and abolition here in New Jersey, we also want to bring location-specific deep understanding about slavery's embeddedness in New Jersey society to the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council. We want to uncover how slavery and the economic system of slavery shaped New Jersey at its founding, and how those impacts continued and continue into the modern era. Joining me in this work today is our intrepid History of Slavery Committee. I'm going to introduce them all, and then we'll call on them to get our conversation started this evening. We have Elaine Buck and Beverly Mills, who are our co-directors of our committee. We're very grateful for them. They are the founders of the Stoutsburg Sauerland African American Museum. Together, our colleagues are also the authors of If These Stones Could Talk, African American Presence in the Hopewell Valley, Sauerland Mountain, and surrounding regions of New Jersey. Our other committee members are Leslie Alexander, who is the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Professor of History at Rutgers University, a specialist in early African American and African diaspora history. She is the author of African or American, Black Identity and Political Activism in New York City, and is the co-editor of 3 additional volumes. And her most recent work is about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. Dr. Marissa Fuentes is the Presidential Term Chair in African American History and Associate Professor of History and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Rutgers, New Brunswick. She is the author of Dispossessed Lives, Enslaved Women, Violence, and the Archive, and also the co-editor of Scarlet and Black, which is Rutgers' own attempts to grapple with its institutional history vis-a-vis slavery and the slave trade. Scarlet and Black, Slavery and Dispossession in Rutgers History, Volumes 1, 2, and 3. So thank you again to this fabulous committee. We are super excited, and I'm going to get us started. My first question is to Dr. Fuentes. Good evening. Thank you. I'm wondering if you could start us off by explaining a bit about how and why Europeans began to enslave Africans in the Atlantic world, and why this is important for us to understand. If we sort of imagine the why question as one that can help us level set our understanding, then help explain to our guests why the why question is so important.
Thank you so much, Tajania, and thank you to my fellow committee members for being here. I'm going to speak more broadly because my colleagues have beautiful, detailed information about the specifics of history in the North and New Jersey. So I'm sort of setting the stage broadly. But there's 2 things I want as takeaways from my comments, and that is that from the very beginning of the history of slavery in the Americas, Europeans grabbed, traded, purchased, and used Africans for profit and labor. The other thing I want to talk about is that the enslavement of Africans was actually a natural progression from the broad Atlantic world and the Caribbean to North America. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. So also important to understand is that all Europeans who left Europe for the Americas had a hand in or benefited from the enslavement of Africans. And these are, I'm speaking back into the 15th and 16th century, the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, the English, the Portuguese, but also some Nordic countries. Sweden and Denmark also have left their mark in the Caribbean. So everybody in Europe pretty much was involved in this venture. The first Africans that were brought to the Americas were brought by the Spanish to South America. They tended to work in non-agricultural labor, and that's also important because when we think about slavery, we think about the antebellum US South, right? Big cotton plantations, but actually it started with harsh labor also in the mines, mining for silver. Many were put up as soldiers, navigators, sailors, ship repairers, eventually clearing land for agricultural work. And they were also enslaved alongside indigenous people, which I think is also important for us to think about through this. So the widespread use of Africans as labor and perpetual enslavement really began for the British in the mid 17th century. And this was as different Europeans were kind of trying to work out what would grow in the Americas and what could be extracted, sold, and traded and brought back to Europe. So they're looking for sort of massive cash economy or something, a product that could be produced on a mass scale. So most folks are actually by now familiar with Jamestown, Virginia. In our kind of popular imagination too, but Africans had actually been in North America since the 1500s, and particularly in Florida. So it's also important to know that this is a broad Atlantic story that involves multiple colonists. And so we're working up to the English who sort of came later in the timeline. But agricultural production also took off in the 1640s, 1650s, when they figured out they could successfully grow a crop on mass scale like tobacco or rice, right? We know those two products in South Carolina and in Virginia, respectively. Slavery was practiced from the very beginning of European colonization. African slavery was practiced from the very beginning. There were other systems of labor that the colonial, or the colonists and the colonial legislators were experimenting with, but they quickly made distinctions based on race and perpetual enslavement. And I just want to briefly talk about two cases. One, at the same time as agriculture is sort of beginning to have traction, large-scale agriculture, John Punch, who was an African, ran away with two other servants who were European. When they were caught, John Punch's punishment was slavery for life. He was African. As opposed to the Europeans who had their indentures extended, right? So you see early on, the legislatures are trying to make racial distinctions between who can and cannot be enslaved for life. The other important case, of course, is Elizabeth Keyes, who sued for her freedom because she was descendant from her father, a white man who was free, and a mother who was African. And at that time, British common law was you gained your status through paternity. And after she gained her freedom, the legislature turned to a law called Partus Sequitur Ventrum that meant that enslaved women would birth other enslaved people. So slavery finally became naturalized in British North America because of the profits that were already being extracted from the Caribbean colonies.
Thank you so much for that. I think what you've shared also reminds us that this is a global story. This is a global history, and we can only ever really examine a piece of this. There will always be more to this story and more as we unravel some of these threads. I think another thing that I want to remind us all is, as the earliest colonists enslaved Africans wherever and whenever they could get access to Africans. In many places in North America, this was happening alongside the enslavement of indigenous people. And so what you see in some of those earliest years is enslaved Africans laboring alongside, living alongside enslaved Native Americans. We also know, and this, I think, for folks who are not as familiar with this history, we know that at least the English, we know this for sure, and I think definitely the Spanish, but the English definitely, the English were willing to dispense with their own laws and understandings, their own understandings of what made sense, of what sort of should govern contract, what should govern property rules. They were willing to dispense with that in order to maximize the potential profit that could happen with African slavery. So what you see is this switch, which Dr. Fuentes described, from having sort of status be patrilineal and inherited from one's father to having status be inherited only from one's mother. Why? Because there were many multiracial and biracial people who would have been able to claim freedom if the fathers were the ones who could bestow freedom. In this way, we were able to maintain the numbers, maintain people in this regime, maintain them in this perpetual enslavement without any chance of relief or freedom. So thank you so much for that. And Dr. Alexander, I think that this is a perfect segue to really talk to you about some of those other common myths. What are some of the common myths that people have about slavery in the North, especially people who think that slavery was somehow gentler and kinder here? Especially in New Jersey. What are myths about that slavery and what this slave society was like? And can you talk a little bit about the reality of slavery and how enslaved people navigated that?
Yes,
Sorry to
thank you
cut you off.
so much. No, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak a bit about this today. I think that part of the problem is that there are so many myths about slavery in the North. And it means that it requires a lot of work and unpacking to really help people in society today understand what the real history of enslavement in the North actually was. So today, I'm just going to try to kind of hit on two of them. The first, and I think the most pervasive myth, is the one that Ryan Haygood alluded to at the beginning, which is this very persistent idea that slavery never existed in the North at all. I just learned recently that a study was done in 2019, so this is just about 4 years ago, that showed that more than half of American citizens had no idea that slavery ever existed in the North. And so I think that part of the work that we have to do is to really reinforce the fact that slavery did in fact exist, and that the North actually became deeply dependent on the slave trade, the buying and selling of humans, and slavery itself for its economic survival. This is certainly true in a place like New England, which Professor Fuentes' comments, of course, alluded to this, that New England as a region became deeply dependent on the trading, the buying and selling of human beings all across the Atlantic world. And it's in fact for this reason that the first laws that were passed defining slavery in the British mainland colonies were actually passed in Massachusetts. Most people, my students are always shocked to learn this, most people assume that the first laws would have been implemented in a place like the Virginia colony or the Carolina colony, but in fact, it's in Massachusetts. And I think that's very telling about how significant and important slavery as an economic and a social and a political institution actually was in the North. I think the other piece of that is that it's important to underscore that economic dependence, that this economic dependence that the North had on slavery and slave trading didn't end during the American Revolution, and it didn't even end after the Revolution, that slavery was never a Southern problem, right? Which is how it was constantly framed and defined. It was actually a central part of Northern life from the very beginning. So I think what's important for our purposes tonight is to think about how and why this happened, especially in a region like New Jersey. As I mentioned a minute ago, the Northern colonies are really the ones that dominated the transatlantic trade, particularly the trade in humans. And so it's not particularly surprising, again, as Professor Fuentes said, that countries like England, like Sweden, like Denmark and Holland, they were the ones who were actually responsible for bringing slavery into the North from the very beginning of the colonial period, with the first Africans being imported into the region as early as the 1620s. So it's within less than a decade after the first Africans are brought into Virginia that they're also brought into the North. So what's important to keep in mind is that this, again, is an international process. So while the British initially are focusing on creating colonies in New England, the Dutch are the ones who begin establishing settlements in the territory that eventually became New York and New Jersey. And they brought slavery with them. Dutch settlers in what was then called New Netherland used enslaved African labor for a wide variety of things: to clear land, to construct towns, to build houses and stores, to lay roads, to grow food, and of course, to build fortifications, right? Military forts and installations that they want to use to protect their settlements from their Native American neighbors and from their European enemies. They also are increasingly inspired by the quality of the soil and the opportunity to cultivate cash crops. And as time goes on, tobacco, corn, and wheat become especially popular. So white colonists increasingly are seizing land from the indigenous peoples and establishing plantations that they are importing Africans and enslaving them on. It's also important to keep in mind that the economic success that slavery brought to this area created a battle among European nations over control. So there is this really complicated period where the region that eventually becomes New Jersey is changing hands. So in the 1650s, the Dutch seize power over the territory, kind of battling with the Swedes who have settled nearby. But in less than a decade, the Dutch were pushed out by the British. And so it's by 1664 that the British assume control over New Netherland and all of its territories, including the places that we now think of as New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. So this is really important because it's part of what brings me to the second myth that I'm going to talk about tonight, which is about the nature of slavery in the Northern British colonies. You sort of said it yourself in the segue, Tajania, which is that for those who actually realized that slavery existed in the North, the tendency is to believe and assume that it was a kinder, gentler slavery, right? That enslaved people in the North primarily worked as domestic laborers and were even treated as members of the white families that owned them. But we know from the evidence, and I know my colleagues on this committee will really take us through some of those details. We know from the evidence that that was absolutely not the case. Under English law, the laws of slavery became more and more restrictive, far more restrictive even than they had been under the Dutch. English laws, as you all mentioned a moment ago, mandated slavery for life. It made slavery an inherited status that, of course, completely overruled British law up to this point, making the mark of slavery an inherited status that's passed from mother to child. And of course, later on, we can talk a bit more about the reasons for that. It also affirmed that even enslaved people who converted to Christianity would not be freed. In other words, there is literally no escape from the institution of slavery. You are a slave for life, it's an inherited status, and there are no escape hatches that can potentially release you from that status. The other thing is that under the British, slavery rapidly expanded. So there's a company called the Royal African Company, which was a commercial enterprise. Often when I'm talking to my students, I talk about it as sort of, a precursor to like a venture capitalist scheme, right? Where people are investing money in the company, hoping that their investments will pay off as slavery proliferates in the colonies. So the Royal African Company is this commercial enterprise that heavily invests in slavery and the slave trade. And they work with individuals and other corporations to ensure that slavery and slave trading would eventually dominate the Northern economy. Now, specifically in New Jersey, English proprietors sought to significantly expand landholding and slavery. So starting in 1664, colonists could receive as much as 150 acres of land for each enslaved person they possessed. So this creates an incentive, a tangible incentive, to obtain more and more enslaved people, which of course dramatically accelerates the proliferation of slavery. So by the onset of the American Revolution, there were over 8,000 Africans enslaved in the New Jersey colony. And by the early 19th century, the enslaved population had grown over 12,000. The last point I just want to make really quickly is that slavery in New Jersey was neither gentle nor kind. These are corn, grain, and tobacco producing regions where enslaved people performed intense physical labor on rapidly developing plantations. Initially, in sort of a painful, ironic twist, they're actually forced to construct and build the plantations where they would be enslaved for life. They were responsible for clearing land, constructing buildings, planting and harvesting staple crops, and tending to livestock. And by the 1720s, New Jersey slavery had become heavily influenced by the harsh forms of slavery that had formed in the British Caribbean. That meant that slaveholders from places like Barbados settled in large numbers in New Jersey and brought with them, replicated the large-scale plantation-style slavery that had taken root in the Caribbean. So soon, and this is the big point, is that the experience of slavery, not the size and the scale, but the nature and experience of slavery in New Jersey was nearly indistinguishable from the Southern colonies or from the Caribbean.
Thank you so much for the myth busting. I think it's critically important for us to have all of this on our minds as we move forward, and particularly this persistent notion that either slavery never existed in the North, or that if it did exist, it was gentle slavery. If the colonial legislatures were willing to grant, or the Crown was willing to grant 150 acres for one enslaved person, then the next logical step here is that it was expected that one enslaved person would be able to clear 150 acres of forest. Because the Lenape people had forests here. This was forest land. So if we're talking about 150 acres of forest that would need to be cleared, and there was one person that the grant expected to do that work, this is backbreaking labor. Thank you so much for that. Okay, Elaine and Beverly, given some of the myth busting, I'm wondering if you can take us back to this colonial period and explain a bit about how the English colonies, the colonial governments, and the colonists themselves, how they recognized, accepted, and proliferated the institution of slavery. And particularly, we want to hear a little bit about the Lords Proprietors in New Jersey and how their agreements and work together with the British Crown helped to give economic advantages, land, money, capital to some of those early colonists.
Certainly. And thank you again for Leslie and Marissa for setting the stage so beautifully about the global aspect of slavery. What Elaine and I like to do is drill down a little to take a micro look at central New Jersey, where most of our work has been done. We started doing this work 17 years ago. We had no idea that we were going to be uncovering the story of slavery in New Jersey, and in particular in our, pretty much, you might want to say, in our own backyards. And another layer to that, that we are also going to be uncovering people that were our relatives. So when we started this work, it was something that we just did not expect to uncover, and it was a story and a research that led us down a path some days that we weren't even able to continue on. It was just so painful. So when we tell the story about the existence of slavery, and as many times as we have given presentations, I can't begin to tell you how many people have come up and just said, we had no idea. We had no idea that slavery existed in New Jersey. We never learned this in school. I mean, Elaine and I all both say, we never learned this in school. We went to one of the best school systems in the state. We never learned this. And as a matter of fact, sometimes people are pretty upset with the fact that they have not learned this. And so when we look at the history, and it's always very important that you, as we have started telling the story from the beginning, so people can have a better understanding of how this all began. And so when you look at the earliest settlement period, you look at Sir George Carteret and Lord Berkeley, and you talked about Lords Proprietors. And so they were co-proprietors of the colony, and then they were set here by the king. So they were referred to as the Lords Proprietors because that was essentially their job, to kind of take care of different regions of New Jersey. So under their leadership, Carteret and Berkeley granted each colonist, and we talked about this 150 acres and how you can just imagine what a daunting prospect that would have been for an enslaved person. You're clearing land, you're building, everything is your responsibility. But in the beginning, it was kind of like a gradual, like almost like an incentive to bring people over to the colony. So under their leadership, Carteret and Berkeley granted each colonist who came with the first governor 75 acres of land, and to every settler before January 1st, 1665, 60 acres for every slave. And the following year, 45 acres for every slave, and to every settler in the third year, 30 acres for every slave. So you can see that incentive kept building and building and building, because it wasn't just, they knew what they had. This wasn't just a one-off. This is a system that they were building that was going to be part of New Jersey's economic structure. So now when you look at the proprietors, Queen Anne then comes into the picture. So by 1702, she comes into power, but she decides she's going to unify East and West Jersey into one colony. So during this period of unification, slavery really ramped up. And when you look at her rule, because she had a very solid relationship with the Royal African Company. Some people say that she had 22% interest in the company. She was making sure that her coffers were lined, okay? And all of her family coffers were lined. So now we see a Lord Cornbury, who, by the way, was the Queen's cousin, was appointed governor of New York and New Jersey. So under his direction, Queen Anne wanted him to make sure that there was a, quote, a constant and sufficient supply of merchantable Negroes at moderate rates, and to make sure that payment was prompt. So she wanted to make sure that the flow of Africans was consistent and constant, so that this hideous slavery could be firmly embedded and entrenched in New Jersey's history. How was this? This was an incredible economic advantage for the early colonists, as here you have this free labor, and who are continuing to supply to the growth of the economy, particularly for the agricultural demands. We talked about, Leslie talked about the wheat, corn, and other grains that Europe and the islands depended upon greatly. So you see this huge growth, this huge spurt during the mid 18th and early 19th centuries, where enslaved people are doing all kinds of labor. When I think about this, I also think about my own personal story. When we talked about doing this research, I think about my fourth great grandfather who came to New Jersey as an enslaved 13-year-old boy. And I think about him coming with a Reverend Oliver Hart, who came from South Carolina, and it was a huge patriot, had to leave the South very abruptly because of his activities supporting the Continental Army. So as he came north, he was able to come and to pastor a church that was looking for a spiritual leader. And he came to Hopewell, and I'm talking about literally 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now, where he brought my fourth great grandfather in 1780. So this 13-year-old was ripped from his homeland of Charleston, South Carolina, and brought here to live the rest of his days in the Saraland Mountain region. So I always think it's important that we humanize this, in that these are people's families. This is what happened to people. This was my fourth great grandfather, and I have other relatives that we have identified, but I just wanted to add that in my closing.
Thank you so much for that, for sharing it, and also for reminding us of how important it is that we remember these are not nameless, unknown, never to be known faces. These are our ancestors. These are people whose people persist, and they had lives, they had dreams, their families had aspirations, they were loved.
They loved,
and
yes.
They were stolen.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Elaine, I wanted to circle to you to ask if you wanted to add anything about that early period and what we should sort of keep in mind as we lay our foundation as a committee.
Well, I want to go back to something that Beverly said about Queen Anne. So when I think about Queen Anne and all the money that she made off of her human cargo, of which, by the way, she tattooed or branded, I should say. She branded her enslaved Africans with RAC, Royal African Company. So you knew that they were her enslaved people. Another thing, when I think about her and all the money that was made from our ancestors, it filters down to today, to the monarchy right now. I mean, they're reaping the benefits of what Queen Anne started way back then. And so I feel my ancestors screaming out and saying, we need racial reckoning right now. It's time for change. And so when I think about the early settlers and how they had full advantage using enslaved people on their plantations. And yes, in New Jersey, they were called plantations. Some people like for us to call them farms. But, well, for example, Colonel Richard Morris of Shrewsbury had 60 or more enslaved people at his mill and his plantation. His plantation was about 6,000 acres. So when you think about that, and think of those 60, maybe 70 enslaved people that worked in that mill, which was an iron mill. So, you had to drill for the iron ore and then process it through these mills. It was back-breaking, hard labor. And so we're talking in the 1690s, all of this was going on. Then in the 1790s, the slave population increased in 7 of the 13 countries or counties. Enslaved individuals made up 15% of Somerset County's population, and the highest growth took place in Essex County at 30%, while Bergen and Morris County, Morris named after Colonel Morris, because now you see that they're naming these towns and places after the powers that be. And so the highest growth took place in Essex County at 30%, while Bergen and Morris County each had 22% increase. And as was said before, in the 1800s, there was an estimated 12,000 enslaved individuals statewide. When Beverly and I do our research and then come up with some of the advertisements for runaways and all the things that we have been finding at the different archives and newspapers and all that. And when we come up with a name of our own family, this is why we are so passionate about racial reckoning, reparations. We're not afraid to say the word reparations. Reparations really are due to us. I was listening to Marissa and Leslie, and I was thinking of all the other things that the enslaved people did besides clear the land, build the barns, build the houses. They had to, there was no electricity, so they had to make the candles. And growing up here in the country with my grandmother and great grandmother, making candles is not easy. It's like the last thing we did after we raised our pigs and slaughtered our pigs. And then we used the lard and then we made the candles. So, these people were working and doing backbreaking work. So you had to do all the things to keep the house going. And also, no, New Jersey, not everybody was brutal and harsh, I'm sure. I don't know. I was not there. I can only imagine. But people that were living in the homes, if they were lucky enough to be living in the homes, they were either in a hot attic with hardly any ventilation or down in the basement where they could keep the fire going. You had to keep the fire going. All these things that we don't think about because we just turn our light switch on. But we really, like Beverly said, these were human beings that not only were they enslaved people, these were children. There was no problem using children. When you think of slavery, my mind automatically goes to somebody that's an adult or whatever. No, these people didn't have a problem with using a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old. We have documentation of this. So we really like to set that stage when we're telling the story about enslaved people right here in New Jersey.
I really appreciate that because I'm getting from all of these remarks from our esteemed historians, I am getting that for too long we have ignored a historical record that was staring us in the face. a
Mhm.
historical record about the enslavement of children, a historical record about the backbreaking work that people were doing in New Jersey from the 17th century forward. We have ignored a historical record staring us in the face about slave sales, slave marketing, slave markets, fugitive advertisements about people being sold south for discipline. We have ignored this evidence at our peril. It exists, it has survived, and it's time that we reckon with what has survived. Dr. Fuentes, I want to circle back to you to ask if you can talk a little bit about this Caribbean connection and the natural progression that you talked about earlier. So where do we see people from the Caribbean showing up in the North American colonies, and why is it important?
Thanks again. I'm sort of just riveted by my colleagues, their comments. But I will say too that what's interesting that you just said about the documents in plain sight, right? They've been there this whole time. I mean, all of us that are working in the archives, decades and decades. That's how much material there is, decades and decades and decades. And it's also how you interpret the material, right? If you're really actually looking for what enslavement was like, right? You have to get through the records of all the traders and all the plantation owners to really get at that perspective. And that's an important part of what we need to do as a committee. But you asked about the Caribbean connection. And very briefly, it's going back a little bit from where my colleagues ended to think about that the British actually simultaneously held colonies in the Caribbean and in North America, simultaneously. Well, then you're governed simultaneously by the same monarch, right? Which means that the colonies across the Atlantic, from North America to the Caribbean, shared networks of trade, of economic projects. You're talking about clearing wood. They're sending it to the islands because they've cleared all those, they cleared the islands off of wood a century earlier. So they need to build, right? So they're supplying the islands with fish, salt fish, to feed enslaved people. And they're fishing off of, the New Brunswick area in up towards Canada. So the connections are maintained even after the American Revolution. And this is important because these families, these planter and merchant families amassed an incredible amount of wealth over a long period of time and were able to sort of use the wealth that they gained in, say, Barbados and use it to colonize and start a new economic venture in a place like New Jersey. And speaking of Barbados, like Barbados was the site, right? It was the first site in the British Caribbean that really mastered the mass scale plantation. And this was through sugar, right? So we know that a lot of the islands, sugar was what generated that economy, massive profits, unimaginable profits. So at some point, Barbados is a tiny island, they ran out of land. They literally ran out of land. So they want to give wealth to their sons. There's nothing to give them. So they send their sons to colonize North America, basically. They went to the Carolinas. Charleston was directly colonized from Barbados, but they also went to New Jersey. And this is, of course, after the Dutch had been ousted by the British. But you have the first families, the sons of these Barbadian planters landing in New Jersey, and absolutely, and I know Dr. Alexander, you referred to this, but like brought the system of slavery with them. There was no question. There was no hesitation. If there was a debate about the use of enslaved labor in Georgia, colonial Georgia, if there was a debate there for 5 minutes, New Jersey didn't have that debate. It was instantaneous. It was common sense that they would bring that idea of and system of slavery into New Jersey. And I think it's also important to think about, and I wanted to say also, the first enslaved people came from Barbados with these sons. But I want to just end really with that the slave laws also generated from the Caribbean. So the first sort of comprehensive system of slave law started in Barbados in 1661. And that comprehensive, this is the assumption that enslaved people are criminals. This is how to punish enslaved people. This is how to punish white people for not punishing enslaved people. This is tying a community together to demonize and criminalize enslaved Africans. All that came from Barbados and then spread around. South Carolina adopted it, Jamaica adopted it. And then once it was adopted, it was adapted to local circumstances. So this Caribbean, it's as if these northern colonies really did have Caribbean roots, right? And some of that continued on into other centuries. Thanks.
I love that. It's as if these northern colonies had Caribbean roots. When you're talking about this Caribbean, this Atlantic history, I think it also, for folks who aren't as familiar with this history, it is important to remember that what was happening in Barbados and happening in Jamaica is happening in New Jersey, is happening in Virginia, is happening wherever the British can make it happen. Settler colonialism looks awfully similar depending on who's in charge. And when the British are in charge, it's some of the same colonial administrators that are moving from colonial society to colonial society and doing this work. And that's why there's so much repetition and so much similarity, because in many cases, it's the same people over years and years and years. Okay, Dr. Alexander, I'm wondering if you could tell us, I know it's not a victory story because I know New Jersey doesn't come to abolition easily. So what finally caused slavery to end in this place?
Right. Well, I think this is a really important point. I think that one of the things that we need to underscore is that slavery in New Jersey, because it was neither a kind nor a gentle system, and because it was so economically powerful and productive, it was not a system that enslavers abandoned easily or quietly. And I think we have to keep in mind, and we kind of alluded to this at the very beginning, but enslavers in New Jersey desperately clung to the institution of slavery. And I think the one point I really want to underscore is that they clung to it not just because it was economically powerful. I think by now we've made that argument this evening. It's clear that it was economically powerful, but I want to underscore the point that it was also socially and politically important to them. I think what we always have to be mindful of is that at its core, slavery is a system that is predicated on the idea that it is reasonable, that it is just, that it is fair. And in the colonial, revolutionary, and antebellum eras, predicated on the idea that slavery was perhaps even ordained by God, that it was ordained by God for one human being to own another human being as property. And I think we have to think about that for a minute, especially in the context of the comment that Elaine made. What does it mean? What does it require for a person to be property, to be reduced to property, and for one person to believe that it is reasonable to hold another person, a child, as their property? What's required in order to justify that kind of system? And so I think I want to say a phrase, use a term that we haven't yet used tonight, but I think we have to. And that is that one thing that it requires, among many, is a basic and fundamental belief in white supremacy, right? It is important to keep in mind that enslavers in New Jersey were as committed to their financial wealth as they were to their sense of social and political superiority. And that bred into the very idea of the institution of slavery is the notion of white supremacy. And that for this reason, not just the economic reason, although that in their minds was enough, but also for the social and political capital that came with this possessive investment in white supremacy, they defended the institution of slavery well into the 19th century. And I think Beverly and Elaine are going to take us through a bit more of the details of how and when and why that happened. But I just want to make a point that gradual emancipation, to borrow the phrase that you used earlier, Tajania, New Jerseyans had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the idea of gradual emancipation. Obviously, New Jersey was the very last state in the North to finally pass some kind of a gradual emancipation act, New York and New Jersey. And New Jersey was under so much pressure in the North to pass a gradual emancipation act that they finally gave in and did so, but not until 1804. And it was structured in such a way that people were held in involuntary servitude and in actual chattel slavery, as we mentioned at the beginning, all the way up until 1866, when when New Jersey was essentially forced to ratify the 13th Amendment in order to remain in the Union. So I do think that we have to kind of name it for what it is, that slavery was certainly an economic and a deeply oppressive economic institution, but it was also a deeply oppressive social and political system that was predicated on this notion of white supremacy.
Thank you for that. That's like a shot to remind us that all of this is in the crucible of white supremacy. There is none of this without a belief in some inherent ordering of human value. And that's, I think, something that we cannot forget. We cannot lose sight of that. For Elaine and Beverly, my last question for today, for our introduction, is to you. I know we want to get to our guests who are here with questions and comments from the public. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that Gradual Abolition Act, and particularly those parts of the act that were designed to compensate slave owners, to provide reparative remedies for slave owners who were going to be forced to relinquish some of their rights in human property.
Yes, we can certainly speak about that, because, but I don't think it's beating a dead horse to reiterate that New Jersey had to be brought kicking and screaming to this point of a Gradual Abolition Act. They had tried different times to legislate how to abolish slavery, but never had any success. And then finally in 1804, a legislation finally agreed upon the Gradual Abolition Act, which essentially compelled slave owners to file with the county clerk a certificate of birth for each child born to a slave mother. So the owner of this mother was required to maintain the care of the child for up to 1 year. And after that period of a year, they could abandon the child, in a sense, so the child then be considered a pauper or a ward of the state, or however you want to consider it. That could be bound out and could also be put out for service to another slave owner. In many cases, the overseers of the poor bound the child out to the former owner. When they bound them out to a former owner, they were also paid a monthly stipend. Now, how did this happen? Because the people that were making the rules were also the people that they were socializing with, or in the same social strata. So it was all pretty much baked in the cake, okay, so to speak. This practice soon put a burden on the Treasury, and it was considered by some that were not slave owners that it was a thinly disguised scheme for compensated abolition. So many saw this as an opportunity for slave owners to claim that they were surrendering their slaves when they had no intention of doing so. So what they were doing essentially was double dipping. They're getting a stipend for claiming that this child or this person was, a pauper of the township, when really what also they were getting a stipend for that person as well. So this practice pretty much almost broke the bank, so to speak.
Mhm.
Thank you so
And
much.
so
Elaine.
someone like me, when I hear that they were getting $3 per child back in the 1800s, Beverly and I decided that we would ask somebody to let's find out what that $3 back in 1805 would amount to right here in 2023. So, I mean, my calculations could be off. Math is not my strong suit. But what I'm looking at here is, so in 1805, $3 a month per each child would be $78.72 in 2023. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. But if you're getting the $3 or the 78.72 for 12 months, then that comes up to $944.64. If you have these 10 children, which was the case here in Montgomery Township, which is the next township from where I live in Hopewell Borough, which is in Mercer County, but would be in Somerset County. You would be now getting $9,446.40 a year for these children that you supposedly are being paid for, because these are abandoned children. And so we can't go into the detail of these economics of this, but you can look it up yourself, because we actually got the information from a disguised scheme for compensated emancipation, accounting for gradual abolition in the 19th century New Jersey. So New Jersey, not only did they have their thuggish mentality, they were very, very brutal in their punishment, to the point of cutting off limbs and ears and feet if you ran away. In some cases, whipping someone 39, 40 times and turn around a week later and take them to another place, another county, and whip them again. I mean, I don't know how our people survived. I really don't know how they survived. So when you think about that and think about, no, New Jersey, you weren't nice. Sorry.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's so powerful to hear those dollar amounts, because one could also imagine though different policy decisions being made, policy decisions that might actually put the value of their labor into the pockets of formerly enslaved people. You could imagine that as a policy decision, but we never see that policy decision. That money, the value of that labor is always being transferred. These are capital transfers from the state legislatures directly into the hands of enslavers. And the people who had labored and toiled and who buried their parents, buried their grandparents in dirt that they would never own. They never got to see a cent. And that is why we are not afraid to say the word and to call out the research that is staring us in the face, and to
That's right.
remind people that when New Jersey made choices about who would be compensated for slavery and for its abolition, it was always enslavers. Thank you so much to this committee. This has been a fantastic conversation, a great way for us to open up. Y'all have sort of hit it out the park, and I cannot wait to see what you do next as a committee. Thank you again. I'm turning it over to Jean-Pierre Brutus for our public forum. This is exciting. Thank you all, and thank you everybody for being here and for learning with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Tashania Henderson, and thank you to the History of Slavery New Jersey Committee for that wonderful, illuminating, and very engaging discussion. Now it's time for our public comment portion. And I know from discussing with them that the committee looks forward to your comments and having those comments inform their work going forward. And I just want to say a special thank you to those of you who have already previously submitted your comments. I know many folks from UU Montclair have already submitted wonderful ideas and comments through our website, and I encourage you all to do so. We had a wonderful response for public comments through our website. We even have a watch party going on right now at UU Montclair, so I want to give them a special shout out for their pre-recorded testimony as well. And so we are now going to engage in public comment, and we would like folks to keep to the 3 minutes allotted. The committee will not be taking questions. So I just want to make that clear. If you do have questions, you're open to asking questions through our website, njreparationscouncil.org. This is an opportunity for you, the public, to express your views during the public comment portion, and for the committee to listen and to learn from you all. I just want to make an important and quick disclaimer that there are a few ground rules for this public comment portion. As pointed out in the flyer, this public comment portion is 3 minutes long. Beverly Lane will call your names. They'll call it 3 times, and then they will also call up the next person in line. So please be ready and please look on the lookout for your name. You will be limited to 3 minutes. You will receive a 5-second warning, and you will be muted at 3 minutes. We will make no exceptions. Hopefully you can stay within the 3 minutes. If you would like more time to express yourself, you can go to the council website, njreparationscouncil.org, to submit, as I've said, extended commentary. Also, we will not allow hate speech, personal attacks, or threats of any kind will not be tolerated. You will be removed promptly from this meeting. Once again, I look forward to your commentary. Now, before I pass it on to Beverly and Elaine, I just want to let you all know that if you have an opportunity, you are all viewing this on YouTube, please check out our video on slavery in New Jersey. It's a short explainer video that's 3.5 minutes long. It's on our bit.ly. You can go to bit.ly.com/ and this is important. It's case sensitive, so each of the words are capitalized. Say the word, so the S to the T and the W are all capitalized. It is case sensitive, and if you are unable to find it from that link, since you're on the YouTube channel currently, for many of you, you can find the video on there as well. And now I would like to pass it on to the committee co-directors, Beverly and Elaine, who will be calling out the names for this public comment portion. So thank you, everyone, once again.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I believe the first person that's to be called is Stephanie Brenner for comment. Stephanie Brenner. No, Stephanie? Okay. Shall we move ahead to Samantha Gordon? Samantha Gordon. Kadira Abdurrahma. Kadira. Okay, we'll keep moving on. Chef C. Chef C.
Yeah, and
Hello.
uh-huh,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay,
All right, let's get this going here. My name is Marion Crenshaw. Chef C is my other name, all of which I own. My lineage goes back to New Jersey in the early 1800s here with my great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, John Crenshaw, okay, who has been here since the very beginning. He has also informed me of my lineage being that of indigenous people who have never left this soil and who are the originators of this soil here, from Blackfoot to Cherokee, as well, being here in the state of New Jersey. Of course, we know it is the original slave state of the North. However, when we're talking about proper repair, you have to keep in mind that there are treaties that were in place for those indigenous people, with which the young lady said earlier were enslaved alongside those imported Africans. So when we're talking about a debt that is owed, yes, it is not only financial repair. There are other things that must be returned to those who originate from New Jersey, including land and among other things. New Jersey has been known for its silk industry and other industries that Black Americans, particularly Black Americans, not African Americans, have built here off our backs. When we talk about repairing the people who are here, okay, we have to keep in mind that there were treaties that were signed with the original people here, known as the indigenous or Black American, okay? Those treaties had to be signed with someone, and we'll talk about repairing those individuals. We have to think about the anti-literacy law and other things that kept those people from knowing exactly who they are, made it illegal for them to read and find out who they are. Okay. There's only one group of people who would deserve repair here. And this should not be looked at as an all lives matter situation. This is coming off as if it is we are the world, and everybody did not suffer in the way that the Black American here in New Jersey has suffered, let alone build it. We can remember the people who came in, but we can't remember the people who were shipped out. And those people look like me. They were here before the Africans even got here. And the land, when you look at the land that was taken away, those are the people who should have that very land returned to them, in addition to the finances that were developed off of the labor with which we put out. So if they were able to enslave the indigenous, right, and that particular hue,
Elaine, do you have the next person?
And now I wonder if we shouldn't start at the top of our list with Isabella, Dr. Isabella Morales. I see she's on. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm now
Okay.
unmuted. Thank you. Good evening,
Yes.
everyone. My name is Dr. Isabella Morales. I am an author and historian of slavery, as well as the editor of the Princeton and Slavery Project, which is a scholarly investigation into Princeton University's historical links to the institution of slavery. I have worked on that project for the last 10 years, And in that time, I've done a deep dive into the history of slavery in New Jersey, as well as one of New Jersey's oldest and most prominent institutions. And so in the interest of more myth busting and historical research, I'd like to share some of our findings here. What we found essentially is that from the time it was established in 1746, Princeton University has sat at the center of a community and a state shaped by slavery. And the irony is that Princeton and New Jersey as a whole is a place deeply associated with revolutionary ideals of liberty and democracy. Many of us will know that New Jersey was the site of more Revolutionary War battles than any other state. Princeton was the site of a battle in 1777. In 1783, the Continental Congress met in Nassau Hall on Princeton's campus, and 5 New Jersey men signed the Declaration of Independence, including John Witherspoon, who was a Princeton president. Princeton had a reputation for patriotism, as did New Jersey. Its leaders preached freedom and civil liberties. Yet all of Princeton's founding trustees owned enslaved people. Its first 9 presidents owned enslaved people. At least 5 of those presidents, all of them ministers of the gospel, brought enslaved people to live and labor on campus. And in 1766, 6 enslaved people were sold, auctioned off on campus from one of those presidents, Samuel Finley's estate. Princeton was also home to an incredibly large proportion of Southern students. At Harvard, between 1820 and 1860, Southerners made up about 9% of the student body. At Yale, it was about 11%. But between Princeton's founding in 1746 and the end of the Civil War in 1865, Southerners made up at least 40% of all alumni. These young men shaped the political character of campus and the surrounding community. They ensured that Princeton remained a conservative bastion in the North, even as anti-slavery sentiment was rising elsewhere. And many of them went on to influence state and national policy regarding slavery. I mention all of this because Princeton is New Jersey in microcosm. As you've heard tonight, New Jersey was the slave state of the North. Our connections to that institution go very deep, back to before the founding of this nation. So while Princeton is one prominent example, it is far from unique in the history of this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morales. And I apologize for skipping over your name. And I'm going to now go to Melissa Weiner.
Weiner, but thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Melissa.
it's okay. Weiner. Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Melissa Weiner. I'm professor of sociology and critical race and ethnic studies at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's an honor to be here with you all tonight. I've cited so many of the committee's work at my own, and I'm so grateful for both your academic and public work on slavery in the North. Thank you also so much, Jean-Pierre, for the invitation. My research examines pre- and post-emancipation enslaving in New York and New Jersey with a particular focus on Dutch settler enslaving families and their victims. So the data I'll mention represent only those Black children, women, and men held captive by Dutch families. If we included the full population of white enslavers, the numbers of illegally enslaved would more than double. As Dr. Alexander explained earlier, enslavers clung to this system, with slavery continuing long after gradual abolition. The U.S. Census pages through 1870, as well as birth registers of children of enslaved women, reveal that long after 1804, white Dutch families held hundreds of Black people captive for profit. In 1860, when according to the census, whites enslaved only 16 people, I find 17 enslaved by the Dutch in Bergen County alone. Overall, the Dutch held at least 37 people legally as enslaved across the state, listing them as such on the census, as well as up to 1,167 free colored people, 118 of which had the same last name as the white householder they're listed with. 29 were recorded with no last name at all. And in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, up to 671 white Dutch families held up to 872 Black people captive in their households, including 97 children and 37 elders born before 1804 and classified as apprentices for life by an 1846 New Jersey law. Scholars around the globe, including in the U.S. North and South, have documented how white enslavers often held children and elders captive to control their free parents' labor. It's likely this was happening in New Jersey to John H. Jefferson, 2 years old, Hannah Price, 9 months old, Emma, Susan, and Tommy listed without last names at 3, 5, and 9 years old. All of these children are listed as living alone in white Dutch households in the 1870 census. The horrors they must have experienced. What's critically important here, and what others have mentioned, is that whites held these Black children, their families, their communities captive for purposes of extracting profit from them, limiting their ability to bargain for higher wages, and ultimately their social, political, and economic freedom. These white families then maintained and generated financial and status benefits from exploited Black labor. They could also accumulate and intergenerationally transfer the financial and other material benefits of this unpaid labor for their own, their families, their descendants, and their businesses' benefit. Black people, on the other hand, were divested of not only their own families, but also their individual, familial, and communal wealth through unpaid labor for white masters for decades. Reparations for centuries of unpaid labor, white profit, and Black people's stolen freedom are certainly due. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Once again, I apologize for skipping over your name, Professor. Elaine, you have the next person, please.
Yes. We did not thank Chef C for his comment, and we're going to move on to the next name, Susan Esquilin. Am I pronouncing it right? Susan Esquilin? And I'll call it a third time. Susan Esquilin. Okay. And Beverly, I'll turn it over to you for the next name.
Okay. I'm looking for Atala Armstrong. If I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Atalia Armstrong. Atalia Armstrong. So we'll move to Gail Ferbert. Gail Ferbert. The last time for Gail Ferbert.
Beverly, Gail is here and just unmuted. I wonder if she can't be heard. I can see that she came off mute, but maybe something's happening with her audio.
Give her a minute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, now we
Yes.
can.
Actually, I had registered to speak, but then I returned and said I would not be speaking. So you can take my name off the list. Thank you. I'm enjoying this conversation and learning a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Elaine, do you have the next person, please?
How about Josh Joseph? Josh Joseph. And if you're on, you can unmute yourself. Josh Joseph.
Josh is on.
He's
We're trying
on.
to see
Okay.
if
Uh-huh.
we've asked Josh to unmute.
Yep. Josh Joseph, can you unmute yourself? Mhm. Yeah, I see Josh Joseph. And I don't know if he can hear us. Should we go on to the next name?
How about Reverend Brittany Palmer?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for the life-saving work you all are doing,
Mhm.
and the important work that you all are doing, because it's definitely needed. not just in New Jersey, but everywhere you could possibly.
Yes.
And my name is Reverend Brittany L. Palmer. I am a freedom writer, preacher, and communications consultant, and I write about race, theology, and systems. And although I've studied and read about the cruelty and just how evil slavery truly was, hearing it still stings. So throughout this event, it still was stinging, I'm sure, for everyone. But my personal experience and reality, we're still trying to figure out more about my ancestors, but my Nana was a sharecropper who migrated from Payville, Georgia to Trenton, New Jersey. And if you know anything about Trenton, there's a lot of Black people who still live there and have been chronically neglected and overlooked. And I recently moved back to Trenton from Atlanta after attending grad school to care for my Nana's property and to be closer to family. And earlier, it was mentioned about being branded. Slaves were branded, right? And I still see brands today. There's so many spiritual, physical, and mental effects of Black people in the area, and especially the conditions. And currently what's going on in the neighborhood in which I live, where my Nana's property is, they're talking about urban redevelopment. Right. And I feel like anytime you're talking about development and urban development, there needs to be a historian or someone who knows about the history of slavery and racism and the effects of it on any board or any committee talking about redevelopment, especially in Jersey and especially in Trenton, New Jersey. So I am interested in money, of course, when it comes to reparations, but also what it looks like for student loan forgiveness as reparations and housing. And when you use the words of redevelopment or however we want to use that language, what does it look like for reparations for people in Jersey, especially Trenton, New Jersey? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Palmer.
Thank you, Reverend Palmer. And to your point, that is the work that is the council is tasked with, to think about reparations expansively. I know that it may seem that 3 minutes is a short time, and we thank you for those of you who have spoken. But if you have extended commentary and you felt that 3 minutes was not long enough to express yourself, please go to njreparationscouncil.org to submit your extended public comment. You can do that via a video or audio or even a written message, right? If you want to sing or write a poem, however you would like to express yourself creatively, please feel free to do so at njreparationscouncil.org. Now, you sat here and heard a riveting discussion. I just want to reiterate, if you want to have a 3.5-minute explainer video, go to bit.ly/say the word video. All of those individual words are capitalized. So the S and the T, the W and the V. For those of you who are in the Zoom currently and did not hear your name called and you were previously registered, can you please raise your hand on the Zoom to let us know? We don't want to overlook you. So once again, if you have registered to provide public comment, you did not hear your name called and you are here currently in the Zoom, please raise your hand so we can call on you and give you an opportunity. We don't want to overlook you. While we are waiting on folks, so there we go.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Hello?
Oh, yes.
Yes, my name is Ahmed Rashawn Stovall. Born in Belleville here in New Jersey. I've traced my lineage back to the 1800s on one side, early 1800s, and late 1700s on the other side of my family. I just wanted to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Elaine and Beverly, may your ancestors rest in power. Wanted to be clear that going back to New Amsterdam, or correction, New Netherlands, when the first plot of land was issued as Pavonia, along with that plot came 50 slaves, 20 males and 30 females, but also swarthy Black Dutch came along with that. The doctor earlier had mentioned how there were free people of color that had been here since the 1630s, actually, coming over with the Dutch. I just wanted to make 2 points about reparations, and first, before reparations, delineation. Flat blackness, first and foremost, people were considered Black. And when you look at every census, we were either classified as mulatto, colored, Negro, or Black. The term African American was introduced into the lexicon, I'd say in the 80s or 90s, you all would know besides that. But I want to make sure that we are not ignoring our ancestors' lineage, and we can use documentation to trace our lineage. Slavery race was not based off of skin color, it was based off of your lineage, oftentimes passed on through a womb. Some slaves were, not all Black people were slaves in New Jersey. Also, reparations. Reparations is lineage based. I'm going off of what's worked from San Francisco all the way through to Chicago to New York. You should be able to trace your family back to the 1865 census. This is actually very simple to do. Again, family must be classified as mulatto, colored, Negro, or Black, and have currently classified yourself for Black for the past 10 years. This is what's worked in San Francisco, and also reparations is cash payments. There was land and labor extracted to build New Jersey. We tilled these gardens. Cash payments is what reparations is. I'm not saying that there are other programs that shouldn't be had, like student loan forgiveness, but white people did not have to pay for higher education. They only started charging higher education when Black people went to school. Cash payments for reparations. Any other plan besides that would be a social program, which is an and, not an or. But if it's not cash payments, it's not reparations. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And what last thing I'd like to touch on is, not only is New Jersey stubborn, New Jersey didn't pass the 14th Amendment until 2003. I'm surprised I didn't hear that on this call. New Jersey was that stubborn. So as people who come here and they slide into Blackness, to be clear, what gave us citizenship was not even ratified in New Jersey until 2003. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Our next name is Chericana Feliciana. I see she has her hand raised. And Chericana?
Alrighty. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Alrighty, I was just waiting to go off mute. Thank you so much for having me here and for this conversation. It's really quick, my comment. It's so timely because I just came back from the library printing out the Civil War pension file for my second great grandfather. So I simply wanted to give that as a piece of advice and offer that for folks doing their genealogy. I have been on the search for this pension record for a while, and I was told, no, we don't have it. You got to go to St. Louis. St. Louis said, no, you got to go here. Finally got in the mail a CD-ROM, and it's 279 pages of a Civil War pension file for my Civil War ancestor. And so I just want to encourage people to do that. There are other ways to document your ancestry. You have to go beyond the census records. It's an important place to start, but in these Civil War pension files, you can get a whole lot of information. I was able to confirm names of siblings, of his children, where he was born, the location of the plantation he worked on, and I can't wait to dive into it. So that's just something I wanted to offer as just a bit of advice on doing your family research and how to document your ancestry. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank you everyone for your comments. And once again, even if you stayed within the 3 minutes, you still have an opportunity to express yourself in a more extended manner through our website, njreparationscouncil.org. Is there anyone currently on the Zoom who wishes to speak, who has not yet spoken and intended to provide public comment tonight? If that is you, if that identifies you, please raise your hand so we can call on you and give you an opportunity. Once again, if you are on the Zoom, you intended to provide public comment, your name has not been called yet, please raise your hand so we can call on you. I'll give you about 1 minute time. If you are not near your computer and you need to sit down and take your time, please feel free to do so. But once again, I want to give you an opportunity. The committee wants to hear your thoughts. So if you intended to provide public comment, have not yet done so, and you are here in the Zoom, this is your opportunity. And while we're waiting for folks, I just want to reiterate that we will have our second public session in December of 2023. That will be the segregation committee. And I urge you to sign up to provide public comment. We will be sending that out. You will have 3 minutes once again to provide public comment. We encourage that. This council is very much a public facing council. We want the public's engagement and insight and contribution. This is not a council that is sitting high on top. This is one that is engaged with everyday folks, right? And so we want the people of New Jersey, folks who are invested in New Jersey, who are interested in New Jersey becoming a better and stronger New Jersey. We want to hear your public comments. So please sign up for the next session that will be in December. That will be the segregation committee. So please be on the lookout for that. So it does not look like, it looks like we have reached all the folks who would like to provide public comment, at least through this, this format. Once again, the public comment format for the website is still open and available to you if you want to provide comment on the history of slavery in New Jersey. If you have not had an opportunity tonight, or you want to provide extended public comment, please go to our website, njreparationscouncil.org, and there you will have the opportunity to express yourself in various ways. And we appreciate and encourage all the creative ways that are open to your imagination. Once again, and you are not limited. So once again, I just want to thank the History of Slavery Committee. I want to thank Dean Tajania Henderson. I want to thank our President and CEO, Ryan Haygood. I want to thank Maisha Simmons for her wonderful support for this council, as well as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And I want to thank our co-directors, Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck, and our co-members, the historians Leslie Alexander and Marisa Fuentes. Thank you so much to you all. And I also want to give a big shout out to our team at the Institute and our Just Strategies for helping us put this together. So once again, I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Be on the lookout for the next committee's public session in December of 2023, segregation in New Jersey. I hope you all have a good evening. I hope you all learned a lot. And let's do this work and build a new and stronger New Jersey, a racially just New Jersey, one where Black people can thrive, one where Black people can win. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.